I voted for Trump all 3 terms. To be honest with you, I'm not a big supporter of him at this point, due to the economy and due to gas prices, due to Epstein files and some other things.
You said you'd bring down the grocery prices. Literally, I must be the most angry person when I grocery shop because I buy the same things every week, and I see it jump every week.
If you could pick one word to describe the economy right now, what would that one word be?
The gutter. The gutter. It's in the gutter.
What would you, if you could talk to President Trump directly right now, what would you tell him?
Should you want me to really say it on air? I say, F you.
F you, and your economy is in the gutter. Those are not my words. Those are not the words of anyone with a Biden or a Harris lawn sign in their yards over the last 10 years. Those were people who voted for Donald Trump 18 months ago. And it is not a good sign when your very recent voters and your political base starts to sound angrier than anyone who thought Democrats should have impeached you. MS Now Alex Tabbitt spoke to now ex-supporters of Donald Trump's as anger continues to grow over Donald Trump's second term as president. It's not just his base that's angry, though. Elected Republicans are increasingly finding the, spine or something else to break with him publicly over his handling of the economy, and his handling of the war in Iran, his handling of the Epstein files, and his insistence on backing candidates in Republican primaries who seem very unlikely to win in November's midterms. Texas Senator John Cornyn sat down with the New York Times after losing the Texas Republican Senate primary. Donald Trump backed his embattled, to put it politely, challenger in that race, Texas's Attorney General Ken Paxton. Cornyn told the New York Times this, quote, "If that's the way friends treat you, you wonder about his enemies." Adding, quote, "I think it's going to be a pretty bumpy ride for the next 7 months. I don't say that with any sort of desire for vengeance. I just think that's the way it's going to be. He's going to have the most miserable 2 years of his life in the last 2 years of his term, I think, because I think November is going to be a disaster." Joining our coverage, Media Matters for America President Angelo Carusone. Tim is still here. Tim, I have to sort of put a pin in all my disgust with all these people who are saying now what a lot of us have been saying for a decade. I'll deal with that in therapy. But you do see elected Republicans in public interviews articulating the true political reality, which is sort of the other half of the rigging of the elections that I think is important, because you have to get in front of Trump's own voters, that he's cheating because Republicans are telling him he's going to lose in a catastrophic political way.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to do something nice for you here. It's a Friday. I don't think you got to put a pin in your disgust for John Cornyn. I think that you can embrace that, and you can enjoy the Schadenfreude, and you can continue to mock him. For the voters, I get it. I think that's smart and prudent because it's important to win people over. But John Cornyn said he's going to oppose Trump. In that same interview, he was blunt about how Trump's going to have a bad 2 years, though. I don't know. I think maybe John Cornyn's misassessing Donald Trump and what he cares about. Donald Trump might have a fine 2 years just golfing and redesigning the East Wing and building a big arch. And I don't know. We'll see. He's going to have a bad 2 years in the traditional political sense, things that people John Cornyn care about. Like, they're not going to pass anything in Congress. He's going to get investigated. He won't get impeached again. So I thought it was pretty striking in that Cornyn interview, though, that he says basically, well, now I have a little bit more freedom. But the nice thing about being an ex-senator, I'm paraphrasing, but he says this, is that ex-senators make more money. And it's just like, it's just so gross. You can see these guys. And now gross. They can say a little bit of truth, right? And they're like, I can get a little bit of distance for Trump. I can pick a couple things now where I can finally be my own man instead of just being Trump's doormat. But I can't do too much still, because I want to be able to lobby when it's over. I want to be able to make money still after it's over. It's just, you can understand why Donald Trump so easily ran over the husk of the establishment Republican Party. So Look, I think that there's a lot of anger out there. I think there's a lot of things that voters, that Democrats should be able to channel with voters. I mean, you've got Donald Trump's buddy becoming the first trillionaire today, Elon Musk. They're going to have the birthday party for him on the lawn. And like all of this out of touch French Revolution style behavior from Donald Trump, I think will be manna for the Democrats politically. But I'm not expecting much heroism from John Cornyn.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, my friend. That's why we're friends.
Yeah, sure.
You see me.
Happy to.
Angelo, let's go back to the voters. F you. I'm so conflicted about bleeping out and sanitizing anything when it comes to Trump, right? The conversation inside his coalition is never sanitized inside sort of MAGA media, but for anyone with kids at home, we bleep that. It's obvious what he was saying. And his own voter describing himself as a 3-time Trump voter, which means he voted for him 15 months ago, saying the economy is in the gutter. Asked, to sort of stand by that, he comes back and says, yeah, it's in the gutter. So this is the reality. This is the lived reality for people Trump used to care about, his own voters. He was in a sort of monogamous communication loop with them in the first term and throughout his 4 years out of office. He has broken that covenant, right? And it seems that the only people he's in a chat with now are people like the guy NPR reported on, the convicted child molester who somehow knew before Todd Blanche says he knew about a $1.8 billion slush fund for the insurrectionists. How do you assess the intimacy, which used to be really sort of a political phenomenon, which has turned into distance between Trump and his voters?
Yeah, I mean, look, that was a source of his strength. I mean, obviously the apparatus around him that he could use, the media apparatus that he could use to amplify, but his connection to that zeitgeist allowed him to then, amplify stories and messages and sort of capture that gut feeling that then enabled him to build power on what used to be considered the fringes, and also pull in people that maybe wouldn't have been there in the first place. So you're right, that is a really important part of this story, and it sort of speaks a lot to what his political power is going to be going forward. And then there's the larger question, which is, what does this mean? And the first thing I'll start with is, and this is where the tension comes in these discussions, is that, or at least is that it's true. The regrets are piling up amongst Trump voters. They are just consistently piling up. And we're hearing this in some places of talk radio, a little bit here and there, obviously in focus groups and polls. But regrets don't equal defections. And I think sometimes people say, well, then it doesn't matter. But it does. Because they don't have to defect. They don't have to become Democratic voters for it to make a difference. They just have to not participate and continue to politically support Trump and those that are enabling Trump. And that's an important part of regrets. It makes a really big difference. The other thing that makes a big difference is the narrative. That is another piece of Trump's thing. We talked about this a lot, his narrative dominance. And when you have so much regret amongst Trump voters, amongst MAGA voters, amongst MAGA audience, MAGA media doesn't have a plan. They don't know how to deal with regretful Trump voters. So what they end up doing is ignoring them. And that gets back to the core of your question, which is, what does that do? Well, if you're being ignored, you just get more mad. And then everything that gets said gets further and further detached. That gap becomes wider and wider and wider. This is a trend we've seen going all the way back to the way they handled the Epstein stuff at first. They turned a crack into a full-blown fissure. And that's the feedback loop that he's in now with his audience. And so these cracks then, these regrets with the audience, they get more mad because, Fox and the host, they just ignore them. They make them mad, and so does Trump. But then the effect is it just continues to brew up. And then the personalities have to slowly start to shift. You heard Jesse Waters say something negative about Trump this week. That is insane. That's incredible. That never happens. I'm not going to give him any credit. That's a big deal, though. He's like the sycophant's sycophant. I mean, the fact that he was saying something critical and not caveat it is a big deal, because it is a small reflection of that audience. Because when Trump's gone,
what was it?
These people are still in these jobs. He was criticizing about Iran, just like Mark Levin is doing it. And Benny Johnson said the same thing, a month ago, 30 days. Benny Johnson said, don't worry, gas prices are going to be $2 by the midterms. He was heralding Trump's power and his success and his skills. This week, 30 days later, he's saying that he was sort of lamenting how bad everything is, and saying that, if gas prices do not return to pre-war levels as we get closer to the midterms, he's going to be angry and very upset and fearful. That is a big shift to happen in 30 days. Now, it's just a one-off. These comments themselves don't add up to a lot, but it does have an effect on the larger story that Trump is telling.